and I'm going to do a very quick bit-by-bit overview because many of the attendees here already know us. I'm not going to read a slide to you. I'm just going to highlight that we are in our 33rd year. We're very proud of that, and that we touch different areas of IT. Clearly, we focus on cybersecurity, managed services, cloud solution, application development, and enterprise facts. So if there's anything here you want to talk to us about, please don't hesitate. With no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who's going to talk to us about Arctic Wolf.
All right. Yeah, as Ivan said, we are 24/7 security operations center. We exist to answer the question, am I being hacked right now, and am I safe? Everybody's got 97 different products and blinking lights and software SKUs that they've got. But fundamentally, am I safe? That's the question that keeps folks up. That's why we exist. We do that by providing 24/7 coverage to watch your network, watch what's happening on your servers and your workstations. When somebody's starting to crack in and break in, we raise a flag, get you involved, set up a war bridge, and stop it from becoming a company-ending event. Awesome. And basically, Bit by Bit and Arctic Wolf work together to help companies align with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, of which there are 5 pillars you see in the middle. So with Bit by Bit, there's a lot of protection involved in what they can do to protect and build strong walls around your network. With Arctic Wolf, we come in and really knock down detection and response. That's what we call managed detection and response. So we really exist to ensure that, again, if somebody is trying to break in, we see it and we respond to it right away, as opposed to having it take days or months before knowing that somebody's in and trying to steal your data. Alex, do you have anything you wanted to add on how Bit by Bit approaches your security offering for customers?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So as a managed services provider, we are able to see really the big picture for our clients and anyone that we provide any kind of services for. So from a high level, we can see all of the areas where security controls would be applied. So that includes, like Jeff said, building strong walls. So, everything from your network perimeter to your cloud services, any hosted infrastructure, and all of the additional types of security controls that we're going to get into in just a minute. But the important thing is that just as the MSP, we coordinate with partners like Arctic Wolf, and we do everything from the high level, but our partners like Arctic Wolf can do things like provide a SOC, which is an entire team of engineers looking at your security, looking at a SIM, looking at all of these events coming in 24 hours a day.
Great, good stuff, guys. So it's our tag team approach here. We're going to get a little bit into the specifics now of the SHIELD Act.
All right, so I'll kick this off. So the New York SHIELD Act is really why everybody's on the phone today. It is not a new law, rather it is an extension or in some cases a redefinition of New York State breach notification requirements. You'll see the section number up there if you want to be super geeky and Google it later on. But the SHIELD Act is live. It went into effect July 25th. And Governor Andrew Cuomo was the one who passed it. It stands for Stop Hacks and Improve Electronic Data Security. So that's what the SHIELD stands for. I mean, that right there tells you why we have this law. For some of you, you might be thinking, why another law? Don't I have PCI? Don't I have HIPAA? Don't I have all these other requirements? What's the purpose of just one more law? And while I understand that sentiment, I can also point you to why we need this law, why it's useful, and how it's different from some of the other cybersecurity regulations out there. So one of the things the SHIELD Act does, you'll see in that bottom bullet point there, is it establishes strict data security requirements. And again, you're going to say, well, don't we already have that with existing regs? One of the things that it does is it redefines the definition of a breach. At its core, a breach used to be seen as unauthorized acquisition of private information. So a hacker goes in, they plant their malware, they're able to exfiltrate a SQL database of your customer's information or a spreadsheet that has private information. When they're able to get their hands on it and get it out of your network, that was what a breach was considered. Not anymore. As of this law, again, signed on July 25th, goes into effect March 21st, right? So just a few weeks out. The redefinition of what is a breach now includes mere unauthorized viewing of private information. So it's not that they even have to get the data out of your network, just unauthorized viewing is considered a breach, and one that has to be reported on, and you have to let your customers or whoever the private information holder is know that their information was viewed. So that's new in this law. All the existing laws, again, if the data was acquired, it was a breach. Now it's just mere viewing. So, and before you start saying, oh, New York State is really litigious and this is just aggressive, understand that states like Massachusetts have had laws like this for over 10 years now. So in Massachusetts, for example, their state level privacy and security regulation has been there for since 2009. So we're not the first to the game in this case. And lastly on this slide, and then I'll let Ivan move on here, is this SHIELD Act is closing some regulatory loopholes. So I know there's for example, a lot of nonprofits that have not necessarily had to comply with HIPAA or PCI or some of the other regs based on what they're doing. So there have been some people who can kind of squeak by and don't have to do certain things. This law is meant to establish a common framework by which all companies, for-profit, non-for-profit, small and large, will have to abide by. So it kind of, levels things out and says everybody has to agree to, following these things. All right, you can move to the next slide.
That's great, Jeff, and we're going to get into a little bit of detail now about what information is covered under the SHIELD Act.
Awesome. So thank you, Ivan. And really, I just said, redefining what a breach is. That's the number one thing that's new with the SHIELD Act. The other major component of this is what is considered private information now is far more broad in definition than what used to be considered private information. So it used to be things like a name and some kind of other identifying information like a social or a driver's license, or some kind of password, and that still is considered private information. But in addition to that, what's new under this law, things that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. So biometric information, including fingerprint, voice print, retina, or iris image, that is now considered obviously private information. Even in any individually identifiable account information, coupled with a credit or debit card number that could be used to access an online financial account, even without any additional identifying information, is considered private information. So that's another layer of abstraction there, away from what would normally be called private information. And then lastly, a username or email address coupled with a password or a security question or anything else that would permit access to an online account. So what you used to know as private information versus what it is today has been broadened. So anybody who says, I was in compliance with this, that, or the other regulation in the past, really go back and look at their cybersecurity posture in light of the new redefinition. All right, Alex or Ivan, I don't know if you have any flavor you wanted to add to that on this slide.
Yeah, thanks again, Jeff. I just wanted to throw in, as we're talking about all these different types of data, it can be a little bit overwhelming, and many organizations, up until these kinds of regulations came into play, didn't really have to look at what information they're actually storing. So just in terms of the security's role in all this, it involves things like data classification, retention, asset management, all of those things, but especially with the data, that's something that we can help with. We do a lot of, just from the policy level all the way down to classifying that information, seeing what you have and what is sensitive and what needs to be protected in the first place.
Yeah, a lot of stuff, and like I said earlier, feel free to pop some questions into the webinar or raise your hand, and time permitting, we'll call you on the end. We're going to start moving into kind of more of the meat and potatoes as it relates to what can be done to comply with the amendment.
All right. So obviously that we're talking about New York State SHIELD Act. It really, again, is a redefinition and expansion of breach notification requirements. One of the unique things here, it's not on the screen, but I'll just talk through it, is New York requires that an organization or any kind of entity that does get breached to notify customers of a data breach within 72 hours of seeing that they've been breached. So not just letting the Attorney General know, not just letting other folks know, letting consumers know within 72 hours. So no longer are the days where you can sit on a breach and get your PR eggs in a basket and figure things out and what's the plan. You have to have a plan. The plan can't be to figure it out as you go, as you're under attack or you're being breached. This new requirement gives you 3 days, and within that period, you have to let your customers know. So there has to be a plan. It's not easy to get notification out within 3 days unless you've already thought of what the communication strategy will be. I think that's important. If in the event of a breach, if affected persons are notified pursuant to Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, HIPAA, HITECH, or the New York State Department of Financial Services regulation, the SHIELD Act doesn't require additional notice to the affected persons, but it does still mandate notice to the New York State Attorney General, the New York Department of State, and the New York State Police. So if you right now don't have that action plan or that communication plan, which we call an incident response plan, that has to be part of your cybersecurity posture. I think a lot of times people focus on the proactive, I'm going to stand up a wall and no one's going to be able to get over it, and I've got my cannons pointed at the bad guys. That's all great, but at some point you're going to get breached. You have to have a plan for it. And the longer that you're undergoing a breach and you're not able to notify customers, or you're running around like crazy, it's a lot of money that you're bleeding. It's a lot of reputation on the line. And really it's hard to get back. Reputation's a soft cost, but in reality, it's the thing that hits people the most when they're getting breached and they didn't have a plan. Alex, did you have anything on that before I talk about this, the 3 bullet points here?
Yeah, I don't want to say too much more. You covered it really well, but just on the incident response side of things, it's crucial to have a plan in place before before you even think about what's going to happen during an incident like this. You need to know that needs to be clearly defined so that no one's scrambling during the incident, and you want to have procedures spelled out for notification, and that involves for larger organizations, communication with the media, and for all organizations, obviously, like Jeff said, it involves these kinds of regulations with regard to disclosure to any affected individuals. So that all needs to be in place well in advance.
I go as far as to say, and it shouldn't sit on the shelf, right? I mean, this is something where it's almost like when the school does a fire drill, right? If this happens, you want to know, everyone at the company, what their role is and what the communication rollout is going to be. So the incident response plan and literally practicing it as a dry run would be important. Jeff, am I on this slide or the next one?
Yeah, I'll make a quick note and then we can move on. There is a provision within the New York State SHIELD Act that if you are able to demonstrate compliance with the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, HIPAA, or the DFS 23 NYCRR 500 reg, then you will be deemed in compliance with the SHIELD Act. The key word there is able to demonstrate. Okay, so it's not just, trust me. The fines are large for non-compliance, so you can't just say it anymore. You have to be able to demonstrate compliance. So if you don't fall under one of these 3 regulations, then there's some things you have to do under the SHIELD Act, which is the next slide. But if you are able to demonstrate compliance for these 3, or one of these 3, then you are deemed compliant with the SHIELD Act. Go ahead. You can move to the next one. All right, so like pretty much any cybersecurity framework or law out there, the Shield Act covers three functional areas: administrative, dealing with the workforce, that's your people, policy, procedure around what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, expectations of staff around cyber hygiene and other things. Technical, of course, deals with data storage and transmission, and it is a cyber regulation, so that's where a lot of this stuff happens. And then physical deals with real world things you can touch: data centers, securing removable media, laptops, and so on. So those are the three functional areas. So really the act is twofold. It says this is what you have to do if you've been breached in terms of notification. And before you get breached, this is the kind of controls you have to have in place in what they call a data security program. And those three areas are what we'll cover next, if you want to move to the next slide. And Alex, I'll let you talk a little bit here on your perspective of what safeguards in just a second. But these bullet points here, these are all requirements under the Shield Act. So any of you who are on the phone, these are all requirements that you have to have in place to satisfy compliance with the Shield Act, again, going effective March 21st. And it's not, it takes a village, right? It's not one person or one company who can help you get compliant. You're gonna have to reach out and work with multiple people. But Alex, I'll let you talk about kind of the things that Bit by Bit does in this administrative realm.
Yeah, thanks. So just want to hit on some of the bullet points directly because this is really all stuff that we focus on. One of the first things I'll mention whenever talking to anybody about building cybersecurity program is policy. You need to have a policy that's really enforced from the top down. So the leadership of the company needs to be directly involved in that part of the process. So that, when we talk about administrative controls, that's really where it all starts. Security really needs to be a priority from the leadership. So from there, we talk about risk assessment, risk management type things, vulnerability assessments, and things like security awareness training. Know before we use this platform that has really nice interactive content, and it's incredibly effective. When it comes to social engineering attacks, email-based attacks, malware or phishing, credential theft, that's really the primary way that attackers are going to be targeting an organization. Obviously, you need to have a secure perimeter. The network side needs to be really strong, but attackers know that they can target individuals who might not be expecting something like that, and that's where the security awareness comes into play. So if you look at the results from these programs, it's incredibly effective in reducing the risk of social engineering, phishing, and malware attacks. So from there, we talk about working with partners, like when we do things from creating policies to the risk assessments to manage risk, MDR, like what Arctic Wolf does. That's where we talk about dedicated cybersecurity staff. They have an entire SOC, an entire team of people watching those events happening, watching the logs, getting notified, and notifying us when anything happens. So that's just kind of a summary of everything from an administrative perspective.
Absolutely, that's awesome. One of the things that's a huge focus on the Shield Act and any other recent regulations, like the DFS requirements, is third-party vendor management. So essentially, these new regs are saying it's not enough to just secure yourself. You don't want to be plugged into risky third parties, right? So at Bit by Bit, at Arctic Wolf, we're audited by third-party firms to ensure that we're compliant and that we're doing things to control and protect and encrypt the data of customers that we work with while we're working with them. So you have to consider who's a third-party vendor, right? It could be your janitorial staff, it could be Office 365, it could be Bit by Bit. It's important that you're not just securing your four walls in your business, but also working with folks that are going to do due diligence when they're working with your private information. So it's not alone. You can't just push the risk off to somebody else. You have to vet people out. and that's on the onus of the person who's who holds the data. Let's move to technical safeguards here. So again, administrative deals with the workforce. Technical safeguards that are required under the SHIELD Act include having a plan around assessing risks, addressing those risks, and knowing where your vulnerabilities are. We like to align with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. It's a free framework you can download online if you type NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And it's really a common language for how to do cybersecurity. So instead of reinventing the wheel, if you're dipping into security and trying to get a little deeper with your business, follow the framework that everybody else in the world uses. And that, again, that's the NIST framework. Within that, there are instructions on how do I perform a risk assessment. That's one of the things that Bit by Bit can help with, is risk assessments, because you need to know where your risks are so that you can effectively spend money on reducing your risks, not your neighbor's risks, not somebody who's in the same industry, but your risks. Otherwise, you're throwing money around wildly and probably not, while it may give you a good feeling, you're probably not actually reducing risks, and you're more susceptible to being hacked. In terms of prevention, you have to be able to proactively, based on what risks you have in place, put controls in to prevent those weaknesses from being exploited. So Bit by Bit does a lot of that, and I'll let Alex talk on that middle bullet point for a second.
Sure. Thanks. So when we talk about prevention, it's a huge topic, and I just want to reiterate the emphasis on following the framework is critical, because in so many conversations where companies are talking to vendors who might be selling something really fancy, bright, blinky lights and everything that's supposed to solve all of your security problems, but without having the policy and without having the framework, you're just kind of putting in point solutions that don't really address the issues that are specific to your organization. So you have to do that, following the framework, having policy, doing the risk assessment, which involves vulnerability assessments, having vulnerability management practice, and that's part of prevention as well. So doing all of those things, having the secure network obviously is important, but it goes way beyond just having a firewall in place. So having a formal program and having providers like us, like Bit by Bit, to oversee that, to make sure everything's being scanned and when things aren't being patched, and to make sure that issues that can't be patched can be resolved in other ways. So that's all part of prevention, and it goes way beyond just installing Windows updates and just having a firewall. So that's really what we're here for. That's what I look to do. So. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, and to tie this point up with the technical safeguards required under the SHIELD Act, I'll make the point that security is not one and done. You don't do it. You can't say, oh, I secured myself in 2017. It's not like you go and you deploy things and you find what your risks were. Chances are that your business has changed drastically in the last 3 or 5 years. You might be moving to the cloud. You might be investigating new line of business applications, potentially a merger, an acquisition. These are all things that change business drastically and will significantly shift your risk. And so it's important to treat security as something that happens and unfolds over time, not just something you did with an eye roll to check a box for compliance. On that note, the specific verbiage used in the SHIELD Act around detection and response, it says, regularly test and monitor the effectiveness of key controls, systems, and procedures. Now that's a direct quote from the SHIELD Act. So what does that mean? How do I regularly test and monitor the effectiveness? In other words, how do I know what I have is actually working? Well, there's 2 ways to do it. You can perform periodic penetration testing, where somebody goes in and tries to hack in and will go through the exercise to try to see where your weaknesses are by trying to break in. That's one way. Another way to do it is to have a security operations center in place. And that's, effectively looking at all the logs and the alerts and what's going on and trying to correlate and tie things together to understand if there's any indicators of compromise. And if so, going and doing some proactive threat hunting to ensure that, hey, if somebody's trying to get in, what are the systems, what data is in play, what are they trying to get out of your network, and so on. So detection and response can really be handled multiple different ways. But the fact that the law uses the word regularly implies that security isn't just a one-time, one-and-done type thing. That's all I had on this slide, Ivan.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, guys.
So I'll make a brief thing here. I know, Alex, you had some stuff you wanted to talk about here. Physical, obviously, is anything you can touch. What's in the real world? And we know that data doesn't just exist out on some ephemeral internet somewhere, but it's real servers, it's real data centers, it's real laptops, real workstations that are storing all this information that's out there for our customers, any of the private information that we have. So you can't just, push things, oh, it's in the cloud. Yeah, but the cloud, anyone can access the cloud from anywhere in the world. So you might as well have multi-factor authentication, right? Or, yeah, but it's in a data center. Yeah, but how secure is that data center? Are there controls in place? Are the doors locked? Is there cameras? So the SHIELD Act does also require, while it is a quote-unquote cybersecurity regulation in most regards, it does require that in the physical world, companies are protecting data from a physical standpoint. And Alex, I know you have a few things you wanted to say here.
Sure. Yeah, just a quick note on the physical safeguards. So when we talk about data destruction, a big question is, how can we destroy data at all? And that goes back to the question of data classification. Part of that is identifying the life cycle of your data. What needs to be saved, what needs to be deleted, and what is actually increasing the risk by retaining it for too long. So once the data reaches the end of its life cycle, it can either be, it can be erased in any number of ways, and hard drives can be physically destroyed. So there are services that'll shred those for you. When it's time to get rid of an old server, we use services that will guarantee and even demonstrate to you that they have shredded those drives. And then just really quick on the other physical controls, it extends to everything from data center security, which is huge. We have 2 very secure data centers where we host our own infrastructure. So there, if you go visit, you'll find things like man traps, biometric controls, all kinds of access controls in place there that they've seen in the movies. And then even think about things like your building. Does anyone check ID when people come in? Some buildings do. Some people can just walk into the elevator. If you're dressed as a delivery person, you can walk right into any office, maybe plug in a USB drive, and all kinds of scary stuff can happen. So physical controls are a really important thing to consider, and that's why it's part of this regulation.
Absolutely. We're going to move into the part of the webinar that talks a little bit about penalties for noncompliance.
Thanks, Ivan. Thanks, Alex. So in contrast to the HIPAA regulation that almost everybody's familiar with, New York SHIELD is coming with teeth. It's coming with some fines right out of the gate that wasn't really part of existing regs out there, at least for about a decade or so. Now we're at a point where HIPAA is matured, and there are fines for willful negligence. In the case of SHIELD, and you can move to this slide here, Ivan, there are significant penalties for non-compliance, and we don't say this out of fear, uncertainty, or doubt. We say it out of genuine care for you, because we wouldn't want anyone to be in the category of getting whacked with a huge fine up to $250,000 because you were ignorant or you didn't know what you had to do or what your responsibilities were. So that's the whole point here. We're here to educate you. New York is interesting. Ohio, 2 years ago, they passed the Ohio Data Protection Act, and the governor there, Governor DeWine, basically said, hey, if you're doing all these administrative, physical, and technical safeguards, then we will protect you under a safe harbor so that even if somebody tried to come at you legally, there will be a shield of protection. interestingly, in New York, there is exclusively no protection for being litigated against during a breach or after a breach. So it's interesting that New York kind of went the absolute opposite way. I'll say that even this week I found that there's some people on a state level trying to pass laws that would require municipalities to not pay ransomware, ransomware Bitcoin. So there's even after the SHIELD Act that we're talking about, there's even still some legislation that's trying to get pushed through. But know that the penalties for noncompliance are $20 per instance of failed notification, up to $250,000. For example, you could have one single Excel file that's got 1,000 of your customers in there and their private information. That walks out your door, that gets taken by a hacker. That is, you multiply the 20, right, times the number of lines in your Excel file, and the limit is 250,000. So easily the breach of one database, maybe that's a back end for your website, or one file that walks out the door could bring you into $250,000 fine if you decide to try to brush that breach under the rug and it's found that you failed to notify consumers or whoever holds the private information. In addition to that, there's legal fees, there's other things that can be lobbed on top of it. So it's not just the fees that would be levied by the Attorney General's office in New York. It's all the other, civil penalties and any other lawful remedy available. So again, we don't say this out of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We say it out of care and concern for those who've joined us today.
Yes, thanks, Jeff. So first of all, we've got a few more minutes. We do have some questions that have come in. So first of all, while I give people the opportunity to ask some additional questions, feel free to enter them into the GoToWebinar or click the raise your hand button and I can unmute you. I'll gather those. We do have a few, so stay tuned. They're good questions. I do want to, at this moment, just let everybody know that we're having a follow-up event, a next event on cybersecurity on Wednesday, March 11th at the Hunt and Fish Club in New York City. And that is going to be an event that we will be able to further elaborate on the things that we've been talking about here. We're going to have a panel which will include both Alex and Jeff, as well as an attorney that specializes in cybersecurity and compliance, and we'll also have a cybersecurity insurance expert, which obviously after Jeff's last comments will be very important to understand about that. So if you are interested in coming to this event, the invitations will be coming out shortly if you're on the list of folks that normally get it. If you're interested and want to let us know, please ping us at info@bidxbit.com. And at that event, we won't be limited to the SHIELD Act. We'll take questions on DFS. We'll take questions on HIPAA, high tech. Basically, all regulations are on the table as we want to help anybody be in compliance, which is what we can do. As a result of this call, if you want to arrange a call with Jeff or Alex and understand how you could put some of these safeguards in place for your organization, then please don't hesitate to reach out to your rep or info@bidxbit.com. So a couple of questions have come in. Let's hit these questions here. So the first one is, if my company was hit by a ransomware attack, is that something that falls under these regulations?
Yeah, the short answer is if information was viewed or acquired from an unauthorized party, then yes. If the ransomware is not trying to steal information but merely encrypt information, then it wouldn't necessarily be considered a breach. And it's good to, Ivan pointed out with this panel that we'll be doing on March 11th, it's also good to have a lawyer who can talk cyber, basically, to answer these things. They're the ones who can really take the law and be experts on it. So I would definitely defer to legal counsel on things like that. But from a strict definition in the regulation, if the data is not viewed or acquired in the process of the ransomware that's being deployed, then it's not considered, you don't have to notify the customers. Although it's going to be really crappy PR if you do get hit with ransomware. So there's that side of it.
And hey, it kind of raises an interesting technical question also because, and I'm very curious to hear what the lawyers have to say about this one, because if if the data is being encrypted, it is being touched, it is being accessed, and if you're looking at the metadata, it's almost equivalent to the data being accessed by an individual. So it's very difficult to distinguish, who, if someone had actually accessed that information. And from a technical perspective, it may appear that they had, even if it is, just a piece of malware or a script. So it's an interesting question, and I'm curious to hear from the lawyer about that.
Yeah, and we have another one, which, again, Alex and Jeff, take your best swat at it, but this might be one that would have been ideal for the panel, but we'll put it out there. The question is, will cyber insurance errors and omission insurance typically cover the type of breach that we were talking about underneath Shield? And I don't know.
I'll take a whack.
All right.
Yeah. It depends. Cyber liability insurance has gotten a lot more mature since 5 years ago when people were starting to really come out with policies. I've seen large scale cases where, the cyber liability insurance provider will say, hey, that was an act of terror. We don't cover acts of terror. I've seen them try to wiggle out of things, calling a cyber attack something other than a cyber attack. I've also seen cyber liability policies that say if you are a willful participant in the breach, then that means we don't have to pay you. In other words, like somebody knowingly took an action, maybe in ignorance, maybe not on purpose, but knowingly took part in allowing whatever the bad stuff was into the network. I've seen exclusions there. You really have to be careful. You really have to talk to a professional and don't go cheap. But also don't think that insurance is going to be the thing that solves all of your problems. If you get hit, your insurance is going to go up through the roof and you're going to pay hard costs. So it's not enough to say my posture is buying a whole bunch of insurance, because certainly you do that and you get hit and then you're going to be sorry, because either no one's going to want to insure you and they'll drop you, or your premiums, just like if you get into a car accident, would go through the roof.
Yeah, and if I could just throw something in, I saw something really interesting this morning on Twitter, which is a great place for your security news. There was an insurance company talking about notifying some of their clients about vulnerabilities and actually advising them to patch, specifically because of a particular strain of malware, of ransomware that's been going around. There are insurance companies, and I think we're going to start seeing this more often, where, just to reduce their exposure, they're actively scanning and monitoring and looking at their customers and forcing them to patch, making sure they have vulnerability management in place. It's just a really interesting situation going on right now.
So with 1 minute, I want to make one comment, see if we can squeeze in one question and wrap it up. So one more thing about the event on March 11th. It's going to be interactive. It's going to be more of a conversation. But we also did something unique with this event. And the last hour from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, we're actually having a networking event. So after the panel is done and the educational part is done, we're going to, have beer and wine. We're going to have the Hunt and Fish Club. And we want the opportunity for Bit by Bit's clients and Bit by Bit prospective clients to just be able to mingle with one another, mingle with the panelists, get to know one another, exchange some business cards, and learn a little bit more about how each organization is handling their IT and cyber. So a lot of here. If you want to talk to Alex, you want to talk to Jeff, you want to come to the event, you want to speak to your rep, reach out. Quick question, don't know if it can be answered in 30 seconds. What is the difference between a vulnerability assessment and a maturity assessment?
I could take that, or Alex. I don't know if you care.
Yeah, Jeff. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So a vulnerability assessment is, finding where the weaknesses are. So those are typically things like unpatched systems. They're devices that may be missing a firmware update. It could be an overly promiscuous firewall rule that somebody inadvertently created, allowing more access than what they intended out of the firewall. Those are vulnerabilities. Those are essentially weaknesses that hackers could leverage those weaknesses as ways to get into your network, steal your data, cause a breach. That's what a vulnerability assessment is and what it does. And the benefit, of course, is where you're weak, you can then go and put controls in place or patch things where you know the weaknesses are, thus reducing your attack surface. A larger scale security assessment, sometimes called a maturity assessment, is more of a look at the entire organization and not only the technical controls you have in place to prevent a breach, but the administrative side of things, the physical side of things, and giving you kind of a scale of from 0 to hero where you stand on all the different areas of cybersecurity, including things like policy and other areas. So that kind of endeavor is a good starting point. And sometimes within maturity assessments, people will also wrap in vulnerability assessments. But the intent of a vulnerability assessment is really on the weaknesses, and a security assessment is really like an overall view from an organization level.
Jeff, thank you. And this takes us really right to, well, we're a minute over, but we lost a little minute because of our screen there. So we appreciate everyone staying on. This was great. I think it was great. I hope that everyone that attended found this to be useful. And just as a reminder, please reach out. You can't learn everything in a session like this, but we hope you learned a lot. Jeff, thank you. Alex, thank you. All our attendees, thank you. And we hope to see you on March 11th.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.